Let's just summarize this for the folks back home. We've got a bill here, as Chairman Nadler says, that's going to set up more bureaucracy to go after domestic terrorism, and that's probably a good thing. And Mr. Biggs has offered an amendment that says you can't use the funds that are going to be authorized in this bill to investigate, analyze, monitor, or prosecute any individual who's declined the COVID vaccine or expressed opposition to it. This is constitutionally redundant, this amendment. It is obvious on its face. But it's not been kicked out by the chairman or anybody else here for being non-germane, because it is germane. This should terrify you. This amendment is germane to the bill because the FBI has already indicated that your opposition to taking the vaccine or to spreading information that might be true but the CDC doesn't agree with will qualify you to be targeted as a possible domestic terrorist.
You're definitely a domestic terrorist.
So, listen, when the CDC changed the definition of vaccination, they changed the very definition of vaccination. If somebody had the gall to point out that that goes against 250 years of medicine, of science, the redefinition of vaccination, should that make him a domestic terrorist? No. This amendment is spot on. The CDC has been involved in the past 2 years trying to cover up something we've known about for 10,000 years. Natural immunity. What if you dared to say that I trust my natural immunity to protect me from the next infection of this virus? Should that... What if I dared it? Okay, maybe I have said that for 2 years. But that shouldn't make you a domestic terrorist. Come on. Why would the Democrats be opposed to this amendment? I don't know. Some have said, well, the language, there should be a for where there's an and or something like that. Well, let's fix it then. Because the fact that this amendment is germane is terrifying. The fact that we even need to mention this amendment is terrifying. The fact that moms are going to be targeted as domestic terrorists because they think their 5-year-old doesn't need the freaking vaccine because they've looked at the data.
And they don't.
They've seen that the flu presents more of a risk to their child than COVID does. Any of the variants. Does that make that mom a domestic terrorist? What if, I mean,
they won't settle it.
It's ridiculous that the Democrats are even opposing this. It should be adopted by unanimous consent. If they have some problem with the language, then let's fix the language. But let's not label moms domestic terrorists for saying they don't want their child to get the vaccine. Let's not label expecting mothers domestic terrorists because they say, I want to go ahead and have my baby before I get this vaccine. Because this data's not been out there. This vaccine, by the way, it could just as easily say, you can't be labeled a domestic terrorist by the FBI for refusing a medical treatment that only one of 3 corporations are allowed to provide in this country.
With no liability.
In other words, if you don't accept a medical treatment for one of these 3 giant corporations, then you could be a terrorist. Yes. And this is the other thing. Joe Biden has said the only industry that's immune to prosecution or immune to liability is the gun industry. That's ridiculous. They get sued all the time for defective products. But who doesn't get sued? Who never gets sued for a defective product? Who's got emergency use? Who's got the PrEP Act? The vaccine manufacturers. Yes. Does that make me a domestic terrorist for saying these facts? It shouldn't. And this amendment should be adopted. And I yield back the balance of my time.